I am Slick Nick, the living legend. And of course, this is my dad. And one of the things I celebrate and focus on this channel is what are things that define masculinity. By default, there are certain aspects of the male mindset that make a man different than a woman. And I've been married, well, I guess 10 and a half years, going on 11 now. And I've said this several times in videos. Those first couple of months of being married, I quickly learned that the main difference between men and women, it's not even physical. It's the way that we're wired to think by default. And so something I have realized is something that is definitely a masculine trait is that men, by default, don't complain. They don't whine. And what puts this in perspective, it was probably a couple years ago, but my wife, Jill, was talking about my dad, and she said, as long as I've known him, I've never heard him complain about anything. And I hadn't thought about that either, but yeah, I can think of my whole time growing up. My dad didn't get upset and complain about stuff. I've yet to hear my dad complain. And that's pretty remarkable, but I think that's a reflection of the male mindset, that we don't complain. And so when you do see a guy complaining, it seems less masculine. Well, that's how I see him. It's like, wait, what's he whining about? I'll tell you something that really brings us to life. So back in the 90s, Sunday afternoons after church, NASCAR was always on. And I remember Jeff Gordon. You didn't like Jeff Gordon. And I was like, why don't you like Jeff Gordon? What's the problem with him? And you said, he just whines too much. That's what you always said about Jeff Gordon. And at the time I couldn't really process that. But it was like, what, would he shift the blame to other people or the equipment, he'd blame it on something else? I just remember you always said that about Jeff Gordon.
Yeah, I guess if he didn't win a race or he thought someone did something they shouldn't have done, he'd whine about it. I mean, he wasn't the only one. A lot of them did, but, he was just the one I picked to not like because he whined.
Well, and I think somehow it maybe helped that he wasn't even a Southerner. Sometimes, if you were from the South, it somehow boosted your credibility as a NASCAR driver. He was born in California, then grew up in Indiana or something like that, or Illinois. So he, I don't know. Not to say that he wasn't a good driver. It was just that, but just from a personality perspective. And I always bring up Andy Bernard from The Office because he's like the worst male ever. He's a woman trapped in a male's body is who Andy Bernard from The Office is. And it's so much of a character study is from that. And something else too, on social media, you'll see people complaining about stuff. If it's any kind of group on Facebook, I'm on a group that is based on the town that I live in Tennessee, where it's supposed to be like a community thing where people can ask questions about, where's a good place to go for Mexican food or whatever. But what actually people talk about the most is they'll have some kind of passive aggressive thing. They're, I went to so-and-so restaurant. Has anybody else had this problem? I'm never going here again. The waitress took too long. All this petty stuff. And I'll see men doing this. I'm like, ugh, that is, no. A man complaining about the service at a restaurant? Who cares? Men complaining about what happened in a movie or whatever it is. Men complaining is, to me, just complete irony. Why is that though? Why is it, and I'm going to ask you, because this is unrehearsed. My dad didn't know what this video was until 5 seconds before I press record. Why do you think it's ironic and out of character for a man to be known for whining and complaining? Psychologically, what would you say?
I don't know what would make a man do that, but I agree, it's not masculine to me for a man to complain. Here's your circumstances that have been dealt to you. You just deal with them. And whining and complaining just, to me, really never changed it. It's still there. You whine and complain about it forever, but, just move on. It's nothing, Don't let things get to you. I mean, if you're going to whine about it, that means it's getting to you. And you've let something defeat you. That's kind of the way I see that.
It's funny because we have, in my lifetime, to my knowledge, we've never had this conversation. This is the first time we've ever had this conversation in this video. Yeah. And what you just said is exactly the answer that I had. For me, one of my mottos in life: focus on what you can control, not on what you cannot.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to things that are emotional. And I think then when I hear a man complain, I think he's letting his emotions get the best of him based on something he cannot control. And what you were saying, kind of just by whatever the circumstance is, I've said that in a recent video. I say, work with what you got. Don't worry about that person or that guy has whatever the thing is that you don't have, that you weren't born with or you can't obtain. Don't worry about that. Focus on what you have and work the best with what you've been given. Mm-hmm. That's what matters, and you're focusing on what you can control at that point. So I think that's why it really stands out when a man complains and is known for complaining and whining, because that's a guy who's not in control of his own life.
Yeah.
He's not controlling his own emotions, his actions, his words, and that's not masculine. And specifically, at the risk of this video sounding somewhat sexist, I have noticed that when women don't complain, and instead of complaining, they just fix the problem. And we made a recent video in the same spot where we talked about how people at work refer to you as MacGyver, and my wife that's how she refers to you as well. Because when there's repairs something at our house, it's like, okay, well, wait till your dad gets back and you and your dad can fix it. But this whole idea of don't complain, just fix it, or don't focus on it anymore. And I've learned, I've seen this in my own life, when women embrace that formula, when they, instead of complaining, just deal with the problem, find a way to fix it, that they are better at what they do, whether it's at work, whether they're more successful. And it definitely helps women, and I've seen this in the workplace, women who don't complain and gossip, but instead just fix the problem or find a way to delegate the problem. Sometimes you can't fix the problem. Sometimes the best way to fix the problem is to find someone who is better than you at that thing and get them to do that, which actually makes you a better leader because you solve the problem by finding someone who's smarter and better skilled than you are at the thing to fix that problem. So that's leadership. And I think too, what I've seen in my life, because with my job, is in all the years I've been working, I've always answered to a woman. Like it's just coincidence, but my boss, my supervisor, it's always women. But something about all of them is they don't complain, they don't gossip, they don't talk about other people. They're focused on the problem, and if they can't fix it, they delegate it. And so if we can learn that from women, we can see this trend happening in which women in the workplace, I mean, maybe not so much for you, but definitely for me. And even, it's funny because I was watching a movie review. There's Mary Magdalene, a new movie about Jesus, and which is like the first movie ever where Jesus is played by an actual Jewish guy, Joaquin Phoenix, who was Johnny Cash in Walk the Line. But in that movie, they're focusing on Mary Magdalene. This is the gospel of Jesus seen through the eyes of a woman who was very close to him. So there's definitely this empowerment of women, and I definitely celebrate it. I definitely consider myself a feminist. I'm all about celebrating women and letting women do the same. But here's the funny thing about it is, there's some irony that when women start embracing certain traditional masculine ideas, like not complaining and gossiping, instead just fixing the problem, which is more of a masculine thing, they actually become better at what they do and more successful. So therefore, I say all that because if the man doesn't embrace not whining and complaining, he becomes more feminine, while women, it's not that they become more masculine, but they just become more successful. They're filling the gaps where men aren't. And that's why I wanted to make this video, especially with you, just because I think that's very important for a younger generation of men who haven't really heard that out loud yet. How important it is to not complain, because then you just become a whiny baby. And I can make this video in all confidence and knowing that I've never heard my dad complain in his life. And my wife was the one who brought that to my attention, that's a character trait there. And I just think that when you think about your life and being successful in your life, that's how I can look at a successful man, because he has been focusing on what he can control and he's done something about it. And ultimately, as far as failures go, you don't let yourself become defined by failures. In fact, failures lead to success, and that's how I think men who are successful do that. Any closing thoughts on that topic?
No, I think your next video,
Okay.
we need to talk about my trailer.
Okay. Let's do that.
Very interesting story.
Let's talk about it. I'm gonna press stop and then I'll press re-record and I don't even know what the story's gonna be about. But comments on this video belong right here.